Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shanti in Place. So nice to see you. I see some familiar faces. Um, we'll just give it another moment or two. I think some folks are making their way in from the waiting room. And as always, we're just so appreciative and so grateful that you can make this time, that you're choosing to make this time for yourselves and for our community together. It's something I've been reflecting on lately, the idea of community on these different levels and what it means to foster community even when we are socially distanced from one another. Some might even say isolated, although I think one of the things that we're trying to do with this gathering and other gatherings like it is really push against the notion of isolation. We may be separated from one another in a physical sense, but that doesn't need to translate into isolation emotionally or spiritually, that we can keep a connection alive and we can support one another through presence. I have a dear friend who talks about the ministry of presence. And I like that idea that we don't need to necessarily, it's nice to talk philosophy, it's nice to discuss ideas, it's nice to ask questions and get into discussions and things like that. But let us not discount the simple and beautiful power of simply being present together. So that's what I'm feeling a lot of. I'm reflecting on that and feeling a lot of gratitude for gatherings like this one. We'll begin as we always do with our guided meditation. And so I want to invite everyone, if you haven't already done so, just take a moment or two to find your comfortable seat. I'm going to adjust myself a little bit as well. That sukhasana, whatever that means for you, that comfortable seat. Grounding ourselves perhaps a little bit more intentionally, finding that center weight of gravity that fixes us in a way that's comfortable and at the same time allows us to be alert and present. Sometimes we equate comfort with getting into a kind of a sleepy state, and it's nice, especially we're also rest deprived and sleep deprived, that it's nice to intentionally sometimes enter into a sleepy state, a sleepy space. But when we speak about sukhasana in a setting like this or for a practice like this, we're really talking about comfort in a way that opens us up, that helps us to be more alert, more focused, more present. And as part of that, let's go ahead, and if you haven't already done so, you can, if you're comfortable doing so, close your eyes or half close your eyes, soften your gaze. Whatever you need to do to mark this transition from engaging with the stimulus of the external, the exterior world, and choosing to step away from that and to step within. And so closing the eyes is often a very helpful, very powerful way of doing that. If you feel more comfortable softening the gaze, I would recommend choosing something, perhaps just a point on your laptop or your phone or some object, some stationary object in front of you, and just softly fixing the gaze, the drishti, on that object. We'll begin our practice as we generally do, with intention, anchoring ourselves to the breath by taking 3 deep breaths in and out. If you feel comfortable and if you're able to physically, it's best to breathe in and out through the nostrils, to hold the breath after that deep inhale, to hold the breath for a few moments, for a few beats, with intention, with purpose, and then to release. If you feel more comfortable, you can also breathe out softly between the lips, softly parting the lips, and it may even result in a soft sighing. That's absolutely fine. Taking a deep breath in through the nostrils, holding and releasing. Again, breathing in and out. One third breath in, letting go. Now continuing to breathe, but allowing the breath to find its natural rhythm, its natural pace. If we struggle with sometimes holding the breath or breathing in a very shallow way, with intention, we can choose to stretch ourselves and breathe a little bit more deeply. But for the most part, no need to control or manipulate, engineer the breath, just allowing the breath to find its own pace, what feels natural and healthy and life-giving in this moment. And as we settle into that natural rhythm, continuing to breathe, and at the same time, noticing the breath. Observing, noticing that rhythm, that pace. Noticing the quality, the texture of the breath. As observers, we can engage our senses, we can engage bodily, physical sensation in this practice of observing. Noticing as we breathe the physical sensation, the feeling of the breath, of the air as it enters and exits the nostrils or the lips. Noticing perhaps any smells, any fragrances or odors that are carried with the air, with the breath. No need to analyze or judge them, just noticing them. Noticing the sensation, the feeling within the mouth, any residual tastes that may be in our mouths. Taking a moment perhaps to connect in a more physical way with the tongue, the lips, Again, nothing to judge, just noticing. Turning our awareness now to any sounds that may be in our space or that may be coming in from outside. We spend so much time categorizing and judging sounds. What is noise? What is music? What makes sense to us? What confuses us? But in this moment, just noticing any sounds that may be coming in from the outside and connecting to our sense of hearing. Continuing to breathe, continuing to notice breath. We can stay right here in this wonderful space of giving ourselves permission to observe without judgment. Or if we'd like, and if it feels right for us, we can take these final moments of our practice to bring our awareness a little bit more into an internal space. To notice now the sounds, the sensations, the feelings that are coming to us from within. Noticing perhaps the sounds of our thoughts, our minds, and with gentleness and intention, bringing our thoughts, our minds back to this present moment, to this opportunity to observe, to be. Reminding ourselves perhaps that there is nowhere else we are meant to be in this moment than here. There is nothing else we are meant to do than to be in this moment. There is no one else we are meant to be than the self that we are observing in this moment. Continuing to notice the breath, to be present to that rhythm, that flow of air in and out. In a few moments, we'll take one final deep breath in and exhale out, chanting or hearing the sacred sound vibration of Om. And as we do that, I want to invite us, if we feel inspired to, if we feel ready to intentionally open ourselves just a little bit more than when we started. We can expand the chest, we can deepen the breath, we can sit up just a little bit straighter. But on a deeper, more internal level, can we also open our hearts a little bit more? Can we open our minds just a little bit more to the realm of possibilities, to the excitement of potential and potentiality, to the mystery, to the magic. As we take this final deep breath together to bring our meditation to a close, can we open ourselves, to each other, to the universe or the divine? Breathing in deeply through the nose. Now gently, in a way that feels comfortable to you, with ease, bringing the eyes open, perhaps blinking them open, widening our gaze, bringing our awareness back to this room, back to our gathering. Thank you all so much. It's wonderful to share this practice with you. I'll go ahead and share my screen and we will continue our discussion. So for those of us who were able to be here last week, you'll recall we started a discussion on the role of inquiry in our spiritual journey, in our journey of mindfulness and cultivating shanti or peace within. We talked about this concept of pritcha or inquiry as being in some ways a paradigm shift from perhaps the way we're used to thinking about knowledge or our practices or our accomplishments. So often we're locked into this paradigm of the so-called self-made man. It's something that's very much part of the kind of collective narrative or the collective myth of Western culture, but it really has become a kind of a global phenomena, where often what we prize is this idea of doing it on our own, figuring it out on our own. Even with meditation and yoga practice, there is sometimes that almost like visceral desire to just do it by myself. But what if we could shift that paradigm into this paradigm that great wisdom texts across different cultures, but particularly in the East, particularly in these dharmic traditions, Hindu traditions, Buddhist traditions, Sikh and Jain traditions, we find so much emphasis on this other paradigm, this paradigm of being formed and nourished and gifted through the grace of others. And what we can do to open ourselves up to that wisdom, to that nourishment. So the analogy that's often used is that of a plant, that for a plant to grow, for a flower to grow, for a tree to grow, however big or small, there's so many factors that need to be at play. And there's so much nourishment that that plant requires to grow from a tiny seedling into its full potential. And that nourishment comes from a number of sources, from the sun, from the rains, from cultivation, from the rich, fertile soil, and sometimes even from unexpected places. The bees carry going from flower to flower and engaging in this act of pollination, right? So all of this nourishment happens whether we're conscious of it or not, whether it's in expected ways, in sought out ways, or in unexpected ways that can be very challenging to our understanding. But this paradigm holds that we grow and we're nourished through the intervention of others, through the gifts and grace of others. There's a really beautiful shloka or verse from the Gita, from the 4th chapter of the Gita, in which Krishna explicitly links the experience of truth or wisdom or knowledge with engaging with and opening ourselves up to receiving that wisdom through inquiry. Tadvidi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshinaha. Krishna speaks to Arjuna. He says, just try to learn truth from the knowers of truth by humbly submitting to them. Sometimes it's translated as surrendering to them, which is quite a strong statement. By inquiring of them and by rendering service unto them. They will instruct you, for they have gained knowledge through the realization of truth or through the experience of truth. So let's unpack this a little bit. And if we can unpack it, if we can understand what this powerful, instructive verse is suggesting to us, I think it really unlocks a formula, a really powerful formula for receiving and sharing wisdom. From the student side, there are three characteristics that Krishna zeroes in on. The first is, he says, pranipatena, which is sometimes translated as surrender or submission. And that can feel, for some of us, red flags go up and we go, wait. You're suggesting I have to surrender to someone or something? That doesn't sound healthy. That doesn't sound pleasant. That can actually sound kind of terrifying, right? We're so, with good reason, right? We protect ourselves, we guard ourselves against being misused and exploited, having our trust exploited. And so the idea of submitting before someone or submitting before others, that can be a really scary feeling. That can be a very triggering feeling. But if we look at it from another perspective, we're constantly submitting to different things. And in fact, according to these teachings and these texts, if we're not submitting to sources of wisdom and grace with intention, very often in the name of not submitting, what we're doing is we're submitting to our own ego. And so here we can think of pranipatena not necessarily as some dramatic act of surrendering, and certainly not surrendering our own faculty of discernment, of thoughtfulness. These same texts that stress the idea of submission or surrender also remind us time and time again to cultivate discernment, right? So this is not a substitute for discernment, but this is with discernment, recognizing I don't need to constantly be in the place of ego. I don't need to constantly be challenging and defying and resisting the possibility of wisdom coming to me from somewhere else. Instead, I can, with intention, displace ego. I can decenter myself, and I can open, as we talked about last week, and as we touched on in our meditation. I can open myself. I can open my mind and heart to that possibility. Right. That is pranipadena. That is submitting. And along with that, that's not just a blind submission or a kind of a submission in silence. That's a submission that's accompanied by pariprashnena, by inquiry, or literally pariprashnena means placing one's questions before, right? So it's in the mood of an open mind and an open heart, cultivating genuine curiosity, cultivating an urgency, right? This is not inquiring just kind of in this like kind of lackadaisical, sort of sometimes we get into the space of just like asking questions for the sake of asking them. But this is genuine curiosity that's undergirded with a sense of urgency, a real like hunger to know, an enthusiasm to learn, an enthusiasm to grow. Right. And if we think about it, pranipatena and pariprashnena are intimately related, because when we are locked into the space of the ego, it's more likely than not that we will approach anything in the sense of, I already know this, I already got this, right? And if we can decenter from there, we start to come into that place of genuine curiosity. We start to replace that tendency to say, I already know, to asking questions about what I don't know, about where I can learn, where I can grow. So pranipatena, pariprashnena. And the third key to unlocking the flow of wisdom from the student side is something that may be a little bit surprising to us, or it may feel culturally very different than what we're used to. But it's this idea of sevaya, of a willingness to serve. And in many cultures and in many traditions, this is often service expressed in a very tangible physical sense. There's a reason why, for instance, in ashrams and monasteries and dojos, the student was expected to perform certain acts of what we might call menial service, or even like chores. Now, those chores didn't necessarily, in and of themselves, have to be sort of spiritual or religious act. So sometimes we have this romantic notion that, oh, I would love to live in an ashram and all day I could meditate. And even the chores I would perform would be these like, I would go and pluck flowers and place them on the altar. And okay, maybe that's part of it, but it's also cleaning the latrines and the toilets and mopping the floor, right? And waking up really early and perhaps, unlocking the doors to the shrine or the monastery, right? That doesn't always feel pleasant. The novelty of it wears off. But what it's doing is, it's doing so much, but two things that I would really want to key into. One, it's externalizing gratitude. It's allowing us to show our gratitude to our teachers, to these sources of wisdom, whether they're in human form or in the form of texts and traditions. It allows us to show and to act out our gratitude, right? It's all fine and well if I say, oh, I'm so grateful, I love you so much. But if I'm not willing to walk my talk, so to speak, there's still something lacking. I'm still holding back. So sevaya, in this kind of radical way, is an invitation, a call to externalize our gratitude, to act out our gratitude, to act out our love or our bhakti. A second related thing that's happening when we lean into seva or sevaya is we're building muscle memory, right? We're putting ourselves emotionally on a very subtle level. We are doing the work of displacing the ego. We're cultivating genuine curiosity and enthusiasm to learn and grow. We're recognizing and embracing where we stumble, where maybe I'm not so good. Maybe I'm a great scholar, or I pride myself on being a great scholar and being able to study texts and to even give you know um, wisdom talks and lectures and teach others. But maybe I'm not so good at mopping the floor. And maybe when I do that, it forces me to recognize I am not as um, I'm as not I'm not as perfectly formed perhaps as I'd like to think. I still have room to grow. I still have my rough edges. I still have my areas of in which I rely on and I'm dependent on the grace, the mercy, and the teaching, the nourishment of others. From the teacher side, there is upadekshanti, there is instructing in the literal sense. And so there is there is great teaching requires taking concepts, taking knowledge and making it accessible, helping it to be accessible, meeting the students where they are. And so effective and spiritually mature, realized teachers, they engage in this kind of pedagogy. They're able to teach in a way that the students will learn. And what Krishna reminds us just at the end of this verse is tattva darshinaha. Their ability to teach rests on and draws from this foundation of realization. Realization, or we can say wisdom, is theoretical knowledge coupled with experience. It's internalized, it's assimilated. So the teachers that we're talking about here, the sources of wisdom, whether it's one teacher or many, it's interesting the verse uses the plural, so that suggests that we can have and should have perhaps many teachers, even if one is particularly dear to our hearts or primary in our lives. Those teachers can also take other forms, non-human forms. We can learn from nature. We can learn from wisdom in books. We can learn from ritual and participating in practices. All of these sources of wisdom can be our teachers, and they all draw from realization. They move us from theory to experience. And this we see so beautifully depicted in the Gita itself. In one sense, the Bhagavad Gita, there's so much there, but even if we take nothing else away from it, let us appreciate that there's a modeling of teacher and student that we can activate in our own lives. And so an invitation, if you feel so inspired, if you'd like to, please take some time, either later today or later this week, and reflect on this. Reflect on this flow of wisdom. So many of us, we have been blessed to teach others, whether in sort of formal ways. Some of us are educators or teachers, hold space as teachers. Others in our own kind of informal spaces. There are folks in our lives, friends, family members, people we connect to in community who, for whatever reason, see us as teachers or turn to us as teachers. How can we effectively lean into that side and allow the flow of wisdom to flow through us through our teaching? How can we draw from that place of tattva darshinaha, of lived experience, and upadekshanti, of meeting our students where they are rather than perhaps where we are or where we want them to be? And for all of us, whether we are teachers ourselves or not, we are all students. And so reflecting on who are those teachers in our lives, there don't need to be many of them. They could be a small handful even, but who are those teachers in our own lives that we wish to learn from? And how can we cultivate this pranipatena, this submission, this pariprashnena, this genuine curiosity and inquiry, and this sevaya, this expressing our gratitude through acts of love and of service? Can we reflect on connecting the teachers in our own lives with these three very powerful practices? So I'll bring it to a close there. And as always, if folks need to leave, I recognize we are at time. But for those who can stay and feel inspired to, if you'd like to, I'd love to hear your questions, your thoughts. Again, no pressure. I know we're speaking about inquiring. And so Not that you necessarily have to have questions. We can sit and kind of ruminate on this for a little bit. But if you do have questions, comments, shares, realizations, we'd love to hear them. So you can go ahead and unmute yourself and share.
So, hello, this is Paz. Can you hear me?
Yes, Paz, loud and clear. It's nice
Hi.
to see you and hear you.
Yes, same here. While I was hearing you today, I was wondering if there is an advice or a technique to help others who are in deep need of this kind of thinking, opening. Because, yeah, I have contact with people in deep trouble personally, their way of thinking, and I'm trying to introduce them to this kind of thinking that gives so much peace to the heart and at the end makes things make sense. Is there a way to help? How to is first steps? I don't know. Any idea?
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. I can hear in your question so much of a desire to help and be of service to others, and that's so inspiring. I think there's lots of ways of answering that, and I would love to hear if others have thoughts on it as well. What's coming to me right now is two things. One is I think there's great power that often we can forget in modeling. Sometimes what we do ourselves, very often, what we do ourselves, the way we're engaging in this process, the way we're opening to the extent that we are with integrity, opening ourselves up, that's powerful. That sends a powerful message that models for others in a way that feels inspiring and safe to them, maybe where we'd like to see them growing into, where we think they can be helped, right? So I would definitely encourage all of us to think about ways in which we can model what we'd like to see for others. And so, so that's one thing that I think often we kind of discount the power of modeling, and we want to jump straight to what can I say, what can I do, how can I teach. Let's first and foremost really cultivate our own practices, our own relationships with these concepts, and model that in a healthy way. And then the second thing is, and a kind of related point, underlying all of these concepts, underlying this idea of pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya, there is the assumption that the student wants and is ready to learn, right? Krishna doesn't start actually teaching any of this until, and we talked about this verse, we looked at this verse last week, until Arjuna comes to that conclusion that I can't do it on my own. Karpanya doso pahata swabhava prichami tvam dharma samudachetaha. He says, I feel it. I feel the confusion. I feel the insecurity, the doubt. I feel the weakness. He says, I feel weak. I need help. I'm ready. I'm ready to be helped. Until someone really comes to that point, it's really difficult. There are exceptional cases where sometimes there's a powerful intervention that can help bring someone to that point. But even there, on whatever level, the person or persons that we want to help, they need to be open to that help. They need to recognize that. And I think there's things that we can do to help bring them to that place, but we also have to respect that they will come to that place when they come to it.
Thank you. You're right.
I'm wondering if others have thoughts on this or something related, or that's just what's on my mind right now. But Liz, please.
It sort of reminds me of Carol Dweck's work around the growth mindset. So she's more educational philosophy, but that same idea of, if you're set to think that you know it all, or that you can't, the curiosity that sends you to being wrong is a failure, then the having a growth mindset is the opposite of that. And it's all about curiosity and making mistakes and learning from your mistakes. So I wonder if that might be another window in what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, it occurs to me that um, often what we can do is to try to create safe, healthy environments in which folks can cultivate that growth mindset, right? Because sometimes it may not feel so safe to do so. It may feel like I'm going to be judged for my failures, or there's going to be these negative, reactions and repercussions, and so better I just close myself off. But maybe from our side, if we can cultivate these kinds of safe, healthy spaces that reward and affirm genuine curiosity and growth, it can make it easier for others to cultivate that growth mindset.
I had a thought about the Sevaya part, because but perhaps it's not a great analogy. So I just wanted to share it with the crowd and see if it stuck with anyone. But so one of my problems is that once I dive really deep into something, for me recently, it's been spiritual study. It can be really easy for me to forget that I have quote unquote real life work to do. I have to study and I have to pass this exam and I have to, get good grades, all so that I can be a better servant, so that I'm better able to follow my dharma, whatever that is. And I was trying to rethink what Sevaya means in my life. And I realized that perhaps like the greatest service that I can give to my teachers and to myself, really, or into the world even, is to just work hard at like what I'm doing now, to study, basically to study hard, as like a form of seva, as a form of like acknowledging that like my teacher is investing so much time and effort into me, that if I don't study hard now to become like the best version of myself, to be able to serve as a educator, as a teacher, as whatever I want to be, then like it wasn't true, like genuine. Then the genuineness of like wanting to dive deep into the spiritual study, it was like just a hobby. It wasn't something serious, something I took to heart, because then I would have taken those lessons into my real life. Although I don't like that distinction, but that's how I'm trying to explain it in my mind. So yeah, I just wanted to know if anyone understood what I was saying or shared that mindset.
Yeah, it's deeply resonating with me. I think that's absolutely right. Right. And again, I touched on this a little bit, but like sometimes we have very romantic, I know I myself have very romantic or romanticized notions of what seva will look like. Um, and sometimes it bears out, and seva does take those forms. That's a little bit more kind of this like idyllic, almost like kind of stereotype notion of what spiritual activity looks like. And more often than that, it's these like seemingly mundane things, but that if we are approaching them as connected to, and as offerings of gratitude, as offerings of, as you put it so beautifully, Ipshita, is like reciprocating with that which others are investing in me, others are giving of their time, giving of their wisdom, seeing it as like, how can I reciprocate with that? Not that they're asking for it, not that I owe them, but just from my heart, I want to reciprocate. Um, it's very often not the like romantic, you know, idyllic things. It's like doing the so-called grunt work. It's like rolling up the sleeves and studying for that exam, or doing whatever our particular work is, but doing it in that consciousness of this is an offering of gratitude. Some of I may have mentioned this. Maybe it even came up in a conversation that we had recently, Ipshita and Sinem. But my wife grew up in a very spiritually rich household. And from a young age, she had this practice. Her parents actually encouraged her to have this practice of like bringing her report card and like offering it at the family altar, the family shrine, the way that in our tradition we would offer like fragrant flowers or fresh fruit or incense and things like that. Um, and so from the outside looking in, it may seem really strange. Like, what is this like traditional shrine? And there's like this like kids middle school report card, sitting on it, offered at the, um, offered to the divinity there. And so it may seem a little strange, but in this mood of what you're speaking of, Ipshita, it makes perfect sense. Um, we offer what we can, and we offer uh, that seva that is our way of like reciprocating with everything we've been blessed with. Yeah. Thank you for that reminder.
So I'm wondering how seva balances with mental and physical health. As someone who tends to have a hard time with the word saying of no and saying no when I need to say no. Need wisdom.
Oh my gosh, such a great question. And I thought I had dodged it. I thought I was about to say, okay, well, we're kind of at that time, whatever. But it's so important, and I'm so I won't dodge it. But I also really would love to hear from others, because I think you've just, Liz, you've really zeroed in on something so important that doesn't often get talked about, particularly in spiritual circles. And I'll say I've experienced firsthand, and I've witnessed the real damage that can occur, particularly in spiritual communities and spiritual practices and meditation circles, um, where we don't know how to set those healthy boundaries and how to say no in a respectful way, and it could be really devastating. So I just want to affirm the importance of your question, and um, perhaps some other folks can weigh in.
So this is something I also very much struggle with. And what I've started thinking about recently is about how to, people used to tell me like, oh, protect your time. And I somehow really didn't like that saying because it comes from like a space of scarcity, like what do they call it? Scarcity mindset, where like there's limited amounts and so you have to protect it. I don't know. It wasn't vibing with me. So I decided to instead think about it something like maybe I'm trying to be the best version of myself. And saying no to this thing is actually helping me grow and to become better. So if my dharma right now, if my goal is to study, I keep making studying analogies because I have to study really hard for an exam coming up. But if I have to study and my friend really wants to watch a movie tonight, and I really, really want to do that, but I have to say no to that experience, even though it would be so amazing, just because I know that 2 weeks later, I will really thank myself. It'll be way better for me to keep studying. Um, I, I think, I don't know, for me, it's just been like a frame shift. Like instead of thinking about like protect your time because there's so less of it, instead I tried to begin thinking about like time as a source of growth and of expansion, of becoming a better version of myself. So I think that frame shift has really, really helped me. Yeah.
Thank you. Do others have any thoughts on this? I'll add him, and I think Ipshita's answer really also resonates with me, or her reflection. One of the things that I'm thinking about right now, especially in preparation for this session, just like, looking again at that passage from the Gita and some of the commentary around it, one of the things I forgot to mention, but I think is vital and I think connects to Liz, to your question, or the point that you're making, is the way that the traditional commentaries understood also this idea of inquiry is, and some of them say this explicitly, is a back and forth. So when we ask questions, our teachers or those that we're inquiring from respond, and we see this in the Gita itself, that gives rise to new questions. We might even say, using our language, there is scope for like pushing back. The mood is one of humility, of curiosity, of growth mindset, of decentering ego. So it's not pushing back for the sake of pushing back, or pushing back in an adversarial or antagonistic way. But some of these commentaries really like emphasize that this process of inquiry is a dynamic process in which if something is asked of us, we are encouraged to ask for clarification, to ask for to articulate if something doesn't make sense for us, or if there's some dissonance. And I think, kind of, this is not stated explicitly, but I think if we stretch that idea out, I think that gives us scope for, permission for, and even encourages us to, by the same token, to push back in a respectful way, and to be able to say no, or at least to ask, that like, hey, I know this is what you're asking of me. This is a situation. Would it be okay if instead we approached it in this way? Sometimes it also is tempting for it to look at it. And sometimes it is very much black and white, yes or no, either I'm going to do the thing or not. But there are also shades of gray. And there's also opportunities to say, okay, this thing's being asked of me. I really don't feel like I can do this, or I don't feel like I have the bandwidth or the time or the energy or whatever to do this. But what is the principle or the spirit of what's being asked of me? And are there other ways I can honor that spirit? Are there different, is there another seva, right? Seva in one sense is not so much the activity itself as the kind of the spirit of the activity. Are there other ways of honoring that spirit of the activity? I know in my own personal life, I've tried to work on also saying no, but in many cases saying no or saying no, perhaps not at this time, and yet remaining open to the possibility. So it's going to differ, right? Sometimes no actually needs to be no, not just like no, not right now, which is kind of putting the question off. But sometimes it's no, not now, not really ever. That's just not for me, or it's just not a compatible, or whatever the situation may be. But just recognizing, and situationally, sometimes it's saying no, but it's also saying no and then recognizing, how else can I honor the spirit of what's being asked? How else can I honor the relationship? How else can I honor the sort of the dynamic flow of, of learning and growing and of wisdom? I hope that's helpful.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it this at the end to get to know yourself better? And that will allow you to, yes, this is me, or this is not me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in a healthy teaching, I mean, we don't have time to really go into it, but right, not all teacher-student or guru-shishya relationships are equal. And, there can be healthy ones, and there can be really less healthy and even toxic, expressions of what may seem like a kind of a teacher-student relationship. But in a healthy teacher-student relationship, the student is very much encouraged to know themselves, and teachers respect and appreciate that. It's actually a sign of growth, in fact. So I can imagine, for instance, Liz, in the scenario or the question that you raised, in a healthy teacher-student relationship, I can imagine where a teacher might actually really appreciate and commend you for having the courage and the discernment and the self-awareness to say no, even if externally it seems like you're sort of butting up against or disagreeing with this notion of seva. On a deeper level, you're actually exemplifying the spirit of seva by acting from a place of self-awareness and discernment. And I think, a healthy, mature teacher would recognize that. And when the teacher recognizes, no, I really want Liz to do this. I know it's difficult. I know, but I feel like you need to do this, Liz. A healthy teacher, any really healthy relationship, I think that person, that other, will feel comfortable in pushing us, in a healthy way to grow outside of our comfort zones. So it's dynamic, right? I don't think there's a one size fits all answer, but the theme that I think is being, is coming up, at least for me, is cultivating healthy rather than unhealthy dynamics in these relationships. To the extent that that dynamic is healthy, there's honesty and self-honesty, there's open communication, there's the freedom to and safety to push back respectfully. To that extent, I think, in each situation, the teachers and students will be able to discern, when is it the best course of action to say no and still honor the spirit, and when is it the best course of action, even if we feel like saying no, to push just a little bit farther. A vast subject and one I would love to explore in more detail. But I also want to honor everyone's time. And so we're nearing 1:00 now by my count. But thank you so much. This is such an amazing experience as always. And we hope you can continue to join us. Please don't be scared off even if you can't stay for our kind of Q&A and free flowing, kind of reflections afterwards. You're always welcome to come just for the meditation or just for the meditation and the presentation. But we're meeting, divinity willing, every Monday at noon. So please do continue to join us. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day and week ahead. Take
You
care.
too. Bye.